Hi everyone, it looks like it's time to get started. I want to welcome everyone. This is the American Indian and Alaska Native Prevention webinar series offered by the American Indian and Alaska Native Prevention Technology Transfer Center. I'm Kate Trams, and today we have Sean Bear and Cindy Sago presenting the sacred and ceremonial use of tobacco in Native American communities. This training series is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Prevention Technology Transfer Center. We are part of a network which includes 10 regional centers, network coordinating office, and another national center, which is the National Hispanic and Latino PTTC. In the next couple of days, we will send out a follow-up email to everyone who attended, which includes a link to the recording, handouts of the slides, and a CEU request form. Our center is an ADEX certified educational provider, and we'd be happy to provide you with CEUs for a $15 fee. Immediately following today's webinar, you will be redirected to our evaluation, which is called the Government Performance and Results Act, or GPRA. And the survey takes just a few minutes to complete and asks about your satisfaction with the event. This feedback is critical to our future work, and we value your opinion and would greatly appreciate your time in sharing your thoughts with us. You will be muted for the duration of this webinar, so please use the chat pod to share your questions and comments, and we will address questions at appropriate points during the presentation. We are thrilled to have Sean Bear on our team for this project, and I'd like to help or welcome him at this time. Sean is the co-director of the Prevention Technology Transfer Center, and he has been working in substance abuse counseling with Native American communities for many years, and his passion is to assist people in overcoming their substance use issues as well as other issues, and to return to the spiritual ways of their ancestors. So I'm excited to have him share on the sacred and ceremonial use of tobacco today. And then we also have Cindy Sago, who joined our team this winter, and she is the program manager for the prevention project. She has a background as a clinical pharmacist and a community pharmacist and public health professional working in communities in sub-Saharan Africa and in the U.S. She's passionate about improving prevention strategies in communities and believes in combining culture with strategy to achieve results. So I want to welcome them both, and I'm going to pass things over to you both at this time.
Yeah.
Okay, hello everyone. This is Sean.
Hi, this is Cindy.
Okay, so for the objective first is to educate about the significance and sacredness of traditional tobacco, how it differentiates from commercial tobacco, share the impact of commercial and recreational tobacco use on our communities, and best practices for commercial tobacco prevention and control. Okay, so from here it's going to be a little bit different because we talk about history of traditional tobacco. We need to also remember that there are many different teachings, many different practices, stories and such like that of tobacco use from far back. So normally what happened is many of the tribes will definitely give credit and say that the Creator gave them tobacco. Many of these are for like prayers or things like that. There's many different names that people might utilize, but we also remember that actually all these different tobaccos that people may smoke from a pipe or anything else, like with either prayers or laying it down for offerings or things like that, it's not all actually from the tobacco plant. So like chanchasha normally is different willows. Kinnikinnick can be different willows. Some also may add such things like mullein. Here they talked about asema. Like I know from like even our tribes, it's what is it? Sayama. But usually when they have different tribes, they might add the native part of it so to tell there is a difference. Um, they put the Sama because it's a little bit different than just Sama here. It's like some might see Sama or Sama, but normally it can mean just the tobacco plant itself. By adding like the in front of it or some of the other kind of words, it differentiates the two because some of these are either chewing tobacco. These might be the kind you smoke out of like a pipe tobacco or another kind. So there is a difference. Um, so if we look at many of the different practices with tobacco, they consider it to be alive. This plant is alive. It comes from a plant. And something that's about this plant, especially looking at it, there are actually regular tobacco plants, and there are actually some of the Indian tobacco plants that are utilized. It's not meant for smoking at all. Some of these are a little bit smaller. We're not supposed to smoke it. It's only for offerings. So, but what's really kind of neat about this is it kind of goes back to many of the different practices that some tribes might believe is that in human beings, we have a male side and we have a female side. So one thing that is the reminder of that through history and far back is also the two-spirit people. They also remind us of that from long ago. How like all people are actually part of their father, part of their mother. So they're both male and female. The thing about it is that Indian tobacco is also male and female. If you plant one plant, it'll fertilize itself and seed. So that's part of the reason they look at it as sacred and that it's alive. It'll help carry your prayers to the Creator, but also in not just offering to the Creator, they might offer it for other plants that may need to be picked, such as if there's a medicine plant that is going to be used for certain purposes, this is the plant that you would offer that to these plants in a sense so you can pick it. One thing about this also is to remember that long ago, all things were supposed to be treated with respect, but also nothing is supposed to be abused because part of that teaching is, how things might come back, or in a sense, like how most people might say karma, because if you abuse it, then it'll come back around and you'll be abused in a sense. Okay, so uses of traditional tobacco, prayers, I've definitely mentioned that. There's healings and blessings. Some of these might be utilized in prayer. Like with healings, in a sense, we need to remember that even though healing might come through another person, such as a medicine person or healer, that person is not actually the one who is doing the healing, because there are other spirits and the Creator and things around that are actually helping, and that's the reason they put out the tobacco, for that to be able to come through. Blessings, in a sense, is that they say that holy people can do blessings, but also it's their connection to the Creator and other beings, in a sense, that brings that blessings through. Smudging, not as many people smudge with tobacco, but it can be utilized as a smudge. But also sometimes in smudging, they might also utilize tobacco in order to, along with that prayer. So in a sense, what we're doing is giving something for our prayers. We're giving something for that healing. And it's also really important. So when you go to a healer or something like that, you usually supposed to present them with a gift. And normally, sometimes what happens is, even if just that gift is tobacco, then that's enough. Anything over that is usually up to the person. So it can be utilized as a gift. It can be welcoming like certain guests to the community, um, giving those tobacco in a sense for such as a prayer or to tell a story, to share their wisdom, for healing or anything like that. Because, in a sense, not all things can be given freely. Some things require a gift in order to be received, and normally that's tobacco. So then they can go ahead and do that. Because what happens is, just as like a smudging in a sense, this tobacco acts as a line in a sense as a defense. So it's almost like placing tobacco in front of the person, and others to protect them. Because, they say that even just one grain of tobacco is very strong. Because spiritually, anything comes to do harm, it has to take that tobacco and leave. So it's also a defensive kind of thing. So it's used in creation stories. One of the creation stories it might be utilized is also like with the grasshopper. So long ago they talked about this grasshopper, but this young man gave the tobacco to the grasshopper, placed it in his mouth, and then he had to leave. So he wouldn't be able to be bothered. So part of that is also looking at the grasshopper. If you look at them and they spit up stuff, it's usually brown, kind of looks like tobacco, look like he's been chewing tobacco, but it's supposed to be able to be with them their whole life. So it wards off pests. Some little pests may not like tobacco, the smell of it, but also they may have used it for, like, if anybody got worms, they chewed up the tobacco, and then certain kinds anyway, and then swallowed that, because then it would kill any worms in there and then flush them out of the body. And of course, remembering that tobacco is a medicine itself. Um, Depending upon how it's utilized as a medicine, um, like if you're offering things for, or you're utilizing that to help heal with others, or you're calling in other spirits to be able to help with that, that's depending upon how it's going to work. So up to this point, are there any questions? Comments at all? I know we have some people online that are from different tribes. I think we have some people typing. Okay, so we have two questions. One is about smudging indoors. So I think kind of smudging indoors is a little bit different, I think, nowadays, because long ago we could build a smudge anywhere we were. I mean, now with fire alarms and kind of things that go on today, it does change. So we have to ask whether we can smudge inside or not. But normally when we do that, a lot of times we use sage. It's very easy to use. Using cedar, it gets a little more difficult depending upon how you're going to do that. Sweetgrass is also fairly easy to use, but if you ever use sweetgrass, you got to keep lighting it too. So, is it disrespectful not to accept tobacco? I think that would also depend upon what's going on. I do know that if somebody was to ask somebody to do like a prayer or healing or something like that, and they may say, no, 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 I cannot do this. You should ask somebody else. So under that kind of part, it would not be disrespectful. One thing to look at is that there are different practices and beliefs, teachings with the tribe, so that I know the way that I've been taught is that if somebody gave me tobacco to do a certain things, that first tobacco right then is for me to pray with and ask if I should do this or not. Can I do this? And then if they say the spirits or anything like that say no, then you don't have to do that. So it's not necessarily something that is set in stone saying this has to be done. Um, Hope that helps. We also have somebody else who's typing. We're working to grow our native medicinal plants. I'm not sure what kind of tobacco you're utilizing. Um, if it's a kind that you cannot smoke at all, I mean, that might be a little bit different because remember, not all these tobacco plants are actually tobacco. So it'd be hard for me to be able to consider that. How does a person qualify to pray? A lot of times it's if you go to a medicine person, a healer, a spiritual leader, or something like that, that is normally something to take into consideration. A lot of times, if you have a medicine person or healer or spiritual person on board, especially from the tribe, and you may want to consider them first. But it's always a good practice that when you come into an area to be able to utilize somebody from that area first, because in a sense, their spirits and stuff are from that area, and you're getting like permission from them. So okay, so about Creationist Stories. So I don't know. One of the stories I talked about was uh, was a grasshopper. So in the end, this boy places tobacco in its mouth, so that's so it would not bother him. It had to leave, and a lot of times, that's the way that he utilizes. But that's why the reason why they say that the grasshopper, when he spits up, um, always looks like he's been chewing tobacco. Okay. Yeah, but that's different because we don't know what kind of plate they're using. Okay, so this is some of the medicinal uses of some of the tobacco. Like I know that there are stories that's been passed down through the tribes. As long ago, there were people who had when they came over from Europe, there was somebody that was ill, and they asked this medicine person what they should utilize to help this person. So this medicine man gave him tobacco. He said to smoke this every day um, until that illness was gone. Once that illness was gone, they had to stop. And this goes along with the same kind of thing as, making sure you do not abuse it, or in a sense it'll abuse you back. So what happened is the man became well again. He decided to kind of benefit from this and began to take some of those plants himself and to make tobacco. So then after that, he began to give it to other people who were going through similar things, and people would get well, but at the same time, he never told them to stop. So they kept doing that, and eventually they got sick from it. So that's part of the reason is, you don't abuse something. Tobacco is never meant to be abused. They might chew on it or something for pain, toothaches. Um, they also might use it as a something to extract from the body. If they chew it really good, squeeze all the juices out of it and put it on a wound or something and it actually can draw the sickness out and into it. Snake bites, headaches, of course, um, to be able to, drink some of them juices or something, to be able to do that. And with the disorder with your gastrointestinal tract, rheumatism, convulsions, whatever they were utilizing would help with some of that. But we need to also remember that these plants might be very different than what we're seeing today within stores. I mean, these were natural back then. They didn't have all, grown with fertilizer, insecticides, pesticides, all these things. They were actually just natural plants. I mean, today I guess people would say organic, but this natural. It's something that we're given to utilize so that it would help us. Also, it's like just utilizing that for prayer. That could also be used as a medicinal use. I mean, placing this tobacco and asking other um, plants or things within nature to be able to help with that. Um, they do say that the oak tree helps very good with the mind. So they might take this tobacco to an oak and ask them to be able to pray with that oak and ask them for that help. But there are many different things within creation that has, in a sense, their gift around certain areas to be able to help them. So it's important in knowing which plants, which stones, which things within creation can help with that. Okay, so commercial tobacco. Now, we're looking at here as with additives. The primary additive that people may be utilizing are getting out of smoke, in a sense, when they use it as a cigarette, is nicotine. It's something to be able to add more nicotine to a plant to make it more addictive. Um, they've comprised approximately 600 ingredients. Um, might be more than 7,000 chemicals burned. I mean, when you're looking at burning something, is we're taking in all these chemicals that are actually within certain things and then burning it, which creates another chemical. So even like tar, coal, things like that, when you burn it, other chemicals are released into the air and kind of created at the same time. So looking at this there are at least 69 are known to cause cancer. It's something very serious to be able to consider when people are thinking about commercial tobacco. It's not exactly the same as a natural tobacco. And I think that over time with commercialized things tend to change over time anyway. Looking at, I mean, the plants may be bigger than they were once before. So it's a lot of times looking at plants and people like in a sense corn. People planting corn, they pick the biggest corn they possibly can to save for the next year to plant, so they get bigger and bigger corn. Maybe they looking at, okay, these taste the sweetest, so we're going to plant those along with these big corn in order to make big sweet corn. So over time it begins to change, and it has been for a very long time. They estimated for most of the corn today comes from the Guadalcanal area, where these corn were very tiny, and they began to plant these and make them bigger and bigger back then. But if you look at that from down there and all the way up through to the northeast United States, a lot of these are utilized corn within there. So a lot of times when we look at, in a sense, continents, it's hard to be able to differentiate between North America and down below, because in a sense, it's all one continent.
Okay, so Sean has really taken us through, how traditional tobacco differentiates from commercial tobacco, and they're very different in very ways. Commercial tobacco is produced for recreational use by these companies, and like he mentioned, some of them have all of them have chemical additives that cause cancer, and commercial tobacco is mass produced and sold for profit, and a lot of them are targeting Native American communities. So looking at this graph is just showing data about the rate of use of commercial tobacco in different communities, different races, and Native Americans have been shown to have the highest level of commercial tobacco use among all racial ethnic groups. The usage is about 40%. That's the prevalence rate. Information has also shown that cigarette use in high schools, in BIA schools, is higher than all high school age students, which is about 56%, double what is seen in other high school age of other races. Smoking prevalence rates in all high schools is about 22% compared to Native Americans, which is about 56%. 1 in 5 of all students in BIA schools have said to have used smokeless tobacco, compared to 1 in 12 in all US high schools. So you can see that there's a high rate and prevalence of the usage in our communities. We can look at some of the health effects and impact on our communities. It goes without saying that smoking is a major cause of lung cancer and a lot of other cancers, and about 90% of all lung cancer deaths are attributed to smoking. So you can see the impact it has on our communities. It's estimated that about 40% of American Indian and Alaska Native deaths are attributed to commercial tobacco use. So you can see that it has been differentiated from traditional tobacco. They're talking about the abuse of commercial tobacco. Smoking is a major cause of cancer. Like I said, bladder cancer. Information has also shown that when you combine smoking with diabetes, it's a lethal combination. And what it does is that smoking and diabetes both reduce the amount of oxygen that reaches your body tissues. So you can imagine if you're smoking and you have diabetes, it means that the blood sugar levels are going to be difficult to control. Among people with diabetes, those that have amputation, 95% of them are smokers. Of course, smoking raises blood sugar levels. Also looking at cardiovascular risk, there's a higher rate of cardiovascular risk for smokers compared to non-smokers. And then looking also at smokeless tobacco, there are also a lot of issues that comes with smokeless chewing of tobacco over time, that is abusing it. You're looking at tooth issues, gum disease, heart disease, stroke, and this is even without inhaling, the chemicals that come out of commercial tobacco smoke. Secondhand smoking is also a big issue, especially looking at how it affects our children. 38% of children aged between 2 months and 5 months have been exposed to secondhand smoking in one way or the other. What this does is that it increases the symptoms of asthma, it puts them at risk of infections, bronchitis, other respiratory infections. There are a lot of hospital visits. Not looking at this, you can look at the cost it even has on our communities. That is the economic impact on our communities. A lot of people are spending money on the addiction that is smoking. The cost of a pack of cigarettes, when you look at for each individual, comes up over $1,500 a year. That's $1,500 a year. And this over 20 years has shown to grow to almost $40,000 for one individual. This is funds and money that could be used in our communities, that could be used in our homes, that is not being used. And then looking at the social cost of healthcare for our communities with this addiction and health effects, it goes without saying that it has a really huge impact on our communities, and it's something that we need to focus on. So we'll look at tobacco industry and the influence they have on our communities with their marketing. The tobacco industry, this first quote, "We don't smoke this crap, we just sell it." This was said by a tobacco executive, R.J. Reynolds. And what brought up this comment was that he was responding to someone's question about why tobacco executives don't smoke. And he acknowledged they know it's deadly. They don't smoke. They don't let their children smoke. They reserve, according to him, the right for smoking to minorities, the poor, and the stupid. And that is how they see our communities. They end up, having strategies that aimed at American Indian people. Some of these strategies is that they try to make commercial tobacco, they try to make it at par with the sacred traditional tobacco. And this is a problem because youths and young people see this as cool. Those who are even very in touch with their culture think it's part of their culture, but they don't know that there's quite a difference. And this targeting is really, it's a strong influence on our children and our community.
Yeah, I think as we look at that, we need to kind of look at the differences in there, because this tobacco that normally we see today may not even be close to what it was before. I mean, the Indian tobacco that is not utilized for smoking at all, it looks like a tobacco plant, but it's not meant for smoking. I mean, they even say we shouldn't smoke it at all. It's only supposed to be utilized for prayer. One thing about it is that we didn't have paper like that long time ago. We would have rolled cigarettes. I mean, even in older stories, you see where people had rolled the tobacco itself, the tobacco leaves, so it would look more like a cigar or something like that. But we also need to consider, especially like with tobacco, people say, okay, tobacco is bad. Tobacco does this, tobacco does that. But at the same time, it's like talking to natives. I think sometimes we look at it a little bit different and say, what do you mean tobacco is bad? We look at it a little more differently, I think. I've heard different people saying, oh, well, what about all the chemicals they're placing in these? I mean, this is not what we utilized. They're adding insecticides, pesticides, all these things to build it so that the plants don't get destroyed by insects and worms and all these other things within their fields. But also looking at youth, we need to remember that as we're growing up, we see older kids who maybe we look up to. Maybe they're the jock on the football team or something like that. But and even they could be some cool kid within the community. If people want to be like them, in a sense, they may try to do what they do. So we also need to educate our youth and things like that, that's not always the best thing to do. Look at some of the things this person is doing that is not so good. But also remember that as a youth that's growing up, that it's not just their brain that is not fully developed until they're around 25. But also, it's like if you look at some of the, if any of you have taken classes or something like that, especially for the DUI class, you learn that even the organs are not fully developed either. So, in a sense, adding something to them or into those organs that's not natural, that's not normal, that's not supposed to be happening, it can affect that person later on, especially a youth. I mean, if their body's not fully matured and to be able to fight some of these things, it can cause more harm later on.
Yeah, and a lot of these companies they add more chemicals to make it more addictive. So even young people, older people, anyone starting to start using conventional or commercial tobacco, you get the the damage is instant. You just keep getting addicted over time, and it gets harder and harder, and there's more issues with our health. And then want to go on to look at e-cigarettes. These are some of the new inventions that these companies have come up with. They make them flavored, they make them look cool, especially, and they're targeting a lot of young people. And these are power devices that heat up a liquid solution that contains nicotine and other chemicals to produce a sort of aerosol or smoke that's inhaled by the use. And if we know from our teachings of traditional and sacred tobacco, it's usually not inhaled. But then, this is that's one of the reasons why it doesn't have negative effects on our people. And these e-cigarettes have been shown to have similar health risks with conventional tobacco. It shows that the studies have shown that young people who start to use these e-cigarettes start using them earlier than those who have started using conventional cigarettes because they see it as cool, they see it as harmless, and that's how these companies are marketing them to young people and even adults, saying they are cool, they are harmless or less harmful than conventional tobacco or cigarettes. And this means that there's a continued rise in the US usage and even in our communities of these e-cigarettes, and they're causing a lot of harm. A lot of adults who use e-cigarettes still use conventional cigarettes, meaning that they end up having a dual usage and multiple usage of these devices. The recent introduction of e-cigarettes means that there's limited information on its use in our communities, in Native Americans, and also the FDA doesn't have strong regulations and policies, which means that these companies are getting away with initiating minorities into using these e-cigarettes. So at this point, are there any questions or comments? Yes, we see Sandy typing. So what happens to lungs when a youth smokes? What happens is that there's an immediate deterioration of the lungs. There's less oxygen able to pass through the lungs for breathing, and slowly begins to develop respiratory issues. It might not show immediately because a lot of this happens slowly. They happen slowly, but they are immediate. And once signs and symptoms begin to show, it's usually too late. And the lungs is one of the most delicate organs in the body. So this is what happens to young people, especially those, as Sean said, their bodies are not yet fully developed, not strong enough, it's still growing, and then already there's a deterioration. So it's sort of like an inverse effect, an opposite effect happening to the body of that young person.
So Steve asked, culturally, are there viable alternatives to tobacco used for American Indian, Alaska Native tribal ceremonies and traditional practices? Kind of goes back to before, because remembering that not all of this tobacco is the same you would buy in the stores. Some of this is grown, some of this is picked from other plants and things like that. Some of For the ceremonies, they might not smoke any of this tobacco at all. But normally, what they say is that when a person smokes tobacco out of a pipe, they do not always inhale it. A lot of times they just smoke that, and what it's doing is to send prayers to the Creator. There might be offering tobacco in a sense to spirit, so it's not always something that they would smoke at all. And sometimes it's utilized in make like prayer ties or prayer flags, and it's wrapped in fabric and things like that. So it's not always utilized in as a smoking thing. A lot of times these are just with as an offering itself or protection.
Okay. Um, so the natural tobacco is not as cancerous as regular cigarettes because, like we mentioned, it's natural. It doesn't have any additives, no chemicals added to it to make it more addictive, and also it's not inhaled. So the natural tobacco is not as cancerous as the regular cigarettes. You can also look at the appropriate use of traditional tobacco. It's not used for pleasure. It's used appropriately in small amounts for the right reasons. But for regular cigarettes, it's used for pleasure, it's used continuously, it's a habitual use. And this is part of what, increases the negative effect of it.
Janet.
Janet typing?
I need to scroll it.
No, that's not what we're suggesting. We're not suggesting that it's okay to purchase commercial tobacco. If anything, we're saying it's not okay to purchase commercial tobacco because of the differences, because of the chemicals, and also because, I mean, of course, the companies make a lot of profit from it, and that also harms our communities. But the main effect of commercial tobacco on our communities is the health effects and the fact that it draws our youth away from the right understanding of sacred traditional tobacco.
Also with that question, is it Jana Suka? Are you saying that is okay to purchase commercial tobacco that has been used for profit and brought harm in the community? Is it all right if it's not inhaled or used as a gift? Well, I do know that there are some medicine people who prefer no tobacco that has any kind of additives at all. It's only natural. So, and there are medicine people who would only take, in a sense, tobacco from our, like that has been like a ceremonial tobacco, something grown for that purpose. But of course, there are many different practices within the tribe, so remembering that, and then also that not all of the tobacco, in the sense that they utilize, like kinnikinick or chanchasha, things like this, are not all tobacco at all, but another plant.
All right. So
So we have some more
I
people.
have some more questions. Okay. Okay. So we have multiple people typing, and maybe we'll continue while we wait for them to finish typing. So going forward, we want to look at the best or promising practices for commercial tobacco prevention and control in native communities.
Well, we had a question there from Arliss in Medicine. I see people offer regular cigarettes in in lieu of tobacco offerings. It seems like a common practice. Do you see that as well? Yes, I do. One thing that the practice, in a sense, what they say is if you have this ceremonial tobacco, that is to be offered first if you have it. If you don't have that, then to offer something in its place. Um, if you don't have that, it kind of filters down all the way to actually cigarettes, but it's not the preferred method. Preference is also to is the ceremonial tobacco.
Thank you, Eliza.
Thank you, Arlen.
Thank you, Alan. So we want to go on to best practices for commercial tobacco prevention and control in Native American communities. Some of the best practices that have been shown to work. One of them is reducing commercial tobacco use initiation. So basically preventing people from starting to smoke, especially young people. Secondly, restrict youth access to commercial tobacco products. Keep minors away from obtaining this commercial tobacco product from the beginning, and then they are less likely to end up smoking. Because there are a lot of ways that some tribes have done this. They have done this by enforcing bans on tobacco advertising in their communities or at tribal sponsored events like powwows. Some have also done counter marketing with key messages about the dangers of tobacco to young people so that they prevent them from even starting to smoke. Some people have also suggested that raising tribal tobacco taxes in order to use those taxes to fund tobacco prevention and control efforts have been helpful. However, these are not usually some of the first, you know, strategies. The first try to prevent people from starting to smoke. Also, increasing commercial tobacco use cessation, helping people to quit smoking is also an effective strategy. I've heard of the Muskogee tribe nation who have developed a program called Second Wind. It's been an adaptation of the American Cancer Society's Fresh Start. So what Second Wind does is that it's a culturally appropriate program with a curriculum that incorporates concepts that are important to the native culture or their tribe as Native American people. Examples of this is using the medicine wheel, understanding of community, courage, and wellness amongst them. And it's not an individual kind of curriculum, it involves the person's family. So you would see that in this program, a lot of families or several generations of families have gotten involved in the program to help support an individual from their home or community who is looking to quit smoking. So these are some of the programs we can have in our communities that can also bring people together. Another best practice is to reduce secondhand smoke exposure. What some examples of this that some tribes have done is, passing laws that protect people from tobacco smoke. You can look at several tribes who have had, smokeless powwow events or rodeos. It's a promising practice. There are a lot of tribes. From what I found out, over 30 Native Alaskan tribes and over 50 American Indian tribes have started passing laws and implementing laws that, prevent secondhand smoke exposure. Of course, decreasing commercial tobacco use in the workplace, for example, in tribal governing offices, clinics, hospitals, some of these places have become tobacco-free zones, and a lot of tribes have been implementing some of these policies and strategies. Other promising strategies in tribal programs that have made some of these programs successful are tailoring or informing the teachings to be specific to the tribal community's culture. So bringing in stories about culture, about respect, about vision has helped to, emphasize the principles of native culture. Also understanding the teachings and the importance and sacredness of traditional tobacco so that people can see the difference between, traditional tobacco and the use of commercial tobacco. Some Eliza said, like all cultural heritage knowledge, more youth know the better they equipped to understand the circumstances. Exactly. And youth involvement in tobacco control and a lot of prevention has been very effective. Young people are very fun. They have a lot of energy and they are willing to go the extra mile. Some young people are able to do student to student trainings in their high schools or their tribal colleges. Some young people and teens are able to use social media and other ways to do advocacy and to educate their peers and even other older people. So youth involvement has been a very strong strategy that has helped to reinforce some of these programs and activities in the communities. Also counter marketing, which is countering the message of the tobacco companies that make it look like commercial tobacco is the same as traditional tobacco or that it's cool. Counter marketing has been a way that health campaigns in some tribal communities have helped to communicate the truth about health and the social cost of tobacco use. It has also highlighted that tobacco free lifestyle is actually the majority lifestyle and not that everyone else is smoking. So this has really been helpful in a lot of communities. Um, Tribal tobacco prevention partnerships. We know that resources are limited and a lot of tribes are also looking to implement, the same strategies, the same policies to help their communities. So state and tribal partnerships can help to provide funding for some of these tobacco control programs. Even intertribal partnerships between different tribes to help, to avoid duplication of efforts and also to be able to reach a larger audience in their communities has also been very helpful strategies. Partnerships with external organizations like the American Cancer Society, the American Lung Association, and local school districts. What happens is that with these partnerships, there are more resources in terms of knowledge and materials that can help people either prevent initiation into smoking or even to quit. So these are some of the promising strategies that have been helpful in some of our communities.
Mm-hmm. I know it's a question about young people start smoking for traditional purposes. Well, we need to remember that in all these traditional purposes, they don't always smoke it. And sometimes it's only like the adult. Sometimes even just only the medicine person will utilize a pipe. But if they do, and pass it around in a ceremony or something like that, youth don't always put the like a pipe to their lips. Sometimes they just might touch it on their shoulder. Sometimes what we're told is also if they can just puff and blow it right out, never inhale. That's the way you do it. It's not necessarily for us. It's supposed to be for the spirits. So yes, cultural knowledge is very important because we're reminding them not to be able to do these things, especially for ceremonies. In a sense, it's very different. It's not supposed to be able to use like that. Okay.
Okay, so Sachin was asking if there are any examples of bans and restriction in tribal communities. We do have some tribes, such as the Nez Perce tribe in Idaho. They recently held, or rather in 2011, they held their completely smoke-free powwow. So they have been able to do that for some of their events. Some communities have used talking circles to gauge community support for smoke-free casinos. So we have the Glacier Peaks Casino in Browning, Montana. They have been able to get smoke-free areas in their casinos. Also, the New Mexico Moco Shot Casino has also, that's the Taos Pablo. They've also been able to have smoke-free casinos. So there are a lot of examples, and if you want, I can get more examples for you and maybe the steps that they took to be able to implement these restrictions and policies in their communities.
So looking at the summary, it's like, well, there's traditional uses and there's commercial uses. Um, One thing that's like to look at that is traditionally there are things that are not bought at all. They're traded in a sense. Normally that's what tobacco is for. In order to give something, in order to receive. It's not something like always that was meant for money. It's remember it's supposed to be utilized in a sacred manner. So whether people are if they utilize something like a traditional tobacco of some kinds in a pipe, a chanupa, whatever it might be, different names in a sense for the same thing is it's how it's used. So a lot of and remembering it, things were not supposed to be abused. Um, a lot of times these tobaccos, in a sense, like the sacred tobacco that we utilize today, there are sometimes within the tribe there are people who are um, on the tribe, they might be the ones who can grow this. They say not everybody can grow this because the way it's taken care of, the way it's handled is very different. It's always kind of considered as it's alive, being respectful of that, remembering that, because in a sense, not to disrespect something or in a sense disrespect you. So things are very different. I mean, there are different things within that cannot be sold. Tobacco is, especially sacred tobacco, is one of them.
Okay, so now that we have learned about the differences, definitely we know that they're used differently in their context and their purpose. We want to share with you some of the resources and what our center can do to support the work that you're doing. We can help provide TA, in areas such as helping to build effective tribal partnership to support prevention. We can also help, develop health communication campaigns on tobacco control, also developing a tobacco prevention or control program from the start with tribal communities. These are some of the areas and more that we can also support the work that you're doing. We can also help provide resources, information, and data that can help enrich the work and programs that you do in your communities. There are also a lot of useful resources. These are some of the resources that are out there. The National Native Network, Keep It Sacred. They have a smoke-free policy toolkit
Thank you so
that
much, Sean,
has
for
resources and
me.
information
And
on
while we're
how
waiting for
tribes can
any other
implement
questions,
smoke-free
I just
policies.
wanted to
Also,
remind
the
everyone
healthcare
that
partnership with
we did
University of
record this
Arizona
session, so
has
we will be
some
sending out a
funding and
follow-up email
trainings that
to
can help
everyone who
support the
attended.
work that people are doing in
And
the
so
field.
watch for that,
A
and
lot
feel
of
free to share
toolkits,
this with
a lot of
colleagues,
useful resources
and
out
view it again
there,
if you'd like to.
promising
And
practices for
also,
commercial tobacco
we'll
prevention
in
and
that email
control
that
in
we
Indian
send out,
country.
we'll
So there's so
include
much out there. You
handouts
can
of the
also reach out to
presentation
us
and
to put these resources together for you
the link
if it's
to our
something that will
survey
help
if you
the
don't
work
get
that
redirected to
you're
that
doing.
directly after
So
we finish up here today.
we have only
So
2 minutes to
watch
the
for
end of the
that,
clock.
and
If you have any more
please, if
questions
you
and
give a few minutes, just let
comments,
us know
we'll
what you
be,
thought of today's presentation, and we will
we can answer them
take
now. Thank you.
that feedback into account.
That's nicotine replacement therapy. For Kristen Frank, you're asking, do tribes use the commercial nicotine replacement therapies, traditional healing practices, or a combination? I believe that most tribes that I have read about use a combination of both, depending on the individual and also, how far the person has gone into smoking. But there are tribes who have used both as a combination out there. So I think it has been helpful with some of the healing circles and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, for recommending Wellbutrin, we wouldn't recommend anything. That's not our thing, but I do know
Wonderful. Thanks so
tribes.
much. I'll just finish up and close this out here. And thank you again for joining us. And thank you to Sean and Cindy for this wonderful presentation. And hope you join us next time. We'll be having prevention webinars every month on the fourth Wednesday of the month. So thanks again.